So we've got a first on the channel. This is the BenQ W2720i projector. And first of all, a big thank you to BenQ for sending this projector out to me for review. So let's talk about what we have here. So as I said, this is the BenQ W2720i projector. So I'm going to look at my phone so I can tell you all the stats because I'm not going to remember everything. But for the display, we have 2500 lumens of ANSI brightness. So we have 4K Ultra HD 3840 by 2160. So this looks to be a native 4K projector, which is very good. Aspect ratio 16:9. We've got 30-bit 1.7 billion colors. And this is a laser light source. So on dynamic, you get 20,000 hours. On normal, you get 20,000 hours. And on eco, you get 30,000 hours. So I think that's the first time I've seen a projector say that you can get 30,000 hours on eco. I guess you can get more hours on, most laser projectors if you put them on eco, but if you're somebody that doesn't need a whole lot of light, 30,000 hours, that's a really, really long time. For picture, we get 90% of the DCI P3 coverage, 98% of the Rec 709 coverage, and we have 12.8 milliseconds input lag at 1080p 120 Hz, 6.5 milliseconds at 1080p 240 Hz, 17.9 milliseconds at 1080p 60 Hz, and 17.9 milliseconds 4K 60 Hz. And this does have two 5-watt speakers and does Dolby Atmos, has eARC, so HDMI 2.1 for you gamers, and this does 3D. Okay, so this is a very small form factor projector. So if you're somebody that's going to be putting this in a hush box or you're going to be mounting this on the ceiling, it's not going to be taking up a whole lot of space. But let's see what we have. So on the top, we have our lens shift. Now this one thing I don't really care for is this is manual. So you have your focus ring and then you have your zoom ring there. So this to me is, I'm not sure why companies are still doing the manual. I'm sure it costs extra to have, digital zoom and stuff like that, focus ring. But if you're somebody that's going to be putting this in a hush box, it might be very difficult for you to get this, your lens shift and your focus, because you're going to have to go to the projector manually. If you have it mounted, then it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. But if it's in a hush box, I can foresee some issues there. So wish they would, go to digital. So you have that there. And then on here, if you open this up, you have your USB for your streaming stick. And speaking of streaming stick, so this does come with a Android TV, and you've got OK Google, so I guess you can use voice command with this. I'm not going to use this. You guys have all seen the Android TV, user interface a million times. I'm not going to show it to you, but it is nice to know that that does come with a streaming stick if you want to just, stream everything directly from your projector. I'm going to be hooking this up to my KALEIDESCAPE. And then on the front, you have your lens cap. Again, this is manual, so you will have to take that off. I'm not a big fan of that. I don't want to have to deal with trying to put the lens cap on or off. I realize this is probably more of a budget projector, so there are some areas where you may not get certain things like you will with Epson and Sony and JVC with those, automatic lens, that you don't have to manually put them on or take them off. So, but that's probably not that big a deal. So on the back, we have a 12-volt trigger. We have RS-232. You have a service port. You have a USB for media reader. You have your audio out, SPDIF, and then you have 3 HDMI ports. So HDMI 1 is HDCP 2.3, and it looks like all 3 HDMIs are HDC 2.3. The HDMI 2 has your audio return plus, and then your HDMI 3 has your 4K 120 Hz. So you're probably going to use that if you are planning on gaming with this thing. And then there's one more USB port, and then you have your power outlet on the back. And it does come with the power cord and a remote. So the remote here is pretty standard. Get a white remote, and then you've got your power button, you've got your standard controls, you know, your volume up, volume down, mute, play, pause, fast forward, rewind, and then you've got some got a microphone so that you can talk to Google if you're using the streaming stick, and then you've got your menu buttons. So I'm going to hook this up to my KALEIDESCAPE and my Oppo 203, and also this does support 3D, so I will be watching some 3D content. Now, to connect the projector to my KALEIDESCAPE, Ruipro, another first on the channel, they sent me 2 of their 8K detachable pure fiber HDMI cables. So this is my first experience with Ruipro. I requested a 10 footer and a 50 footer. So what's interesting about Ruipro is this has removable or detachable HDMI tips. So this is a fiber optic cable. And the one difference with, or a big difference with fiber optic cables is with your standard HDMI or your copper cables, they're limited on the length. So I don't remember what it is. I think if you go over 35, somewhere between 35 or 50 feet, you will start to lose quality. I tried to use a 50-foot HDMI cable a couple weeks ago at an event, and we couldn't get any picture. It was a 50-footer somebody bought from Best Buy that they needed really quick. We couldn't get any video. Now, I was using a different fiber optic HDMI cable from a different brand. That was, I think, a 35-footer, no issues. So the one thing with fiber optics HDMI cables, you can do super long runs. I don't know what the max is, but you'll probably never get to that point. But what's interesting is you'll see the HDMI cable is very thin. I mean, super thin, very small form factor. I like that because it's fiber optics. You have these 2 tips. So you have one HDMI tip that says source, and the other one says display. So what you would do is you would remove this tip here. I'm not going to do it now, but you would remove this tip, and then you would put the HDMI tip onto whichever end. It doesn't matter which end it is. You just have to make sure that whichever end says display. So this one would go into the projector, and then the source would go to your Blu-ray player, your Xbox, KALEIDESCAPE, anything like that. Now this one is a 10 footer. They did send me a 50 footer. I'm going to be using the 50 footer to connect the BenQ to my KALEIDESCAPE, just so that I have, you know, more than enough room. But I've heard very good things about Ruipro, so I'm excited to get this on the channel and test it out. Now, you will have to provide power to the cable. So that does come with a few USB cables. So you have on your display, you probably won't be able to see it, but there's a little HDMI slot there. So you would plug in your USB. So you would plug in the USB there. So you would plug in the USB to the HDMI source, and then you will plug the other USB into the, or you could plug it into pretty much anything to power it, but I'm going to plug it straight into the projector and see how that works. Okay, so when you first turn the projector on, you'll be greeted with this screen. So you can select if you have front projection, front ceiling, rear, or rear ceiling. Right now I have front projection, so I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to ask you for your language. And then it's going to tell you to plug in the BenQ HDMI media streaming stick. So I'm not really going to do this. I have mine hooked up to my KALEIDESCAPE. The streaming stick is a Android streaming stick. You've all seen the Android software 1,000 times, so I'm not going to bother you with it. But it does come with it, as I showed you in the beginning, and you can plug that in. And then it's going to ask you if you need to connect your eARC audio device now, and I do have the KALEIDESCAPE connected to the eARC, so I'm going to select yes. And then it's going to tell you that you can make digital adjustments whether you have a screen or not, and simply choose skip to keep the original. So mine looks pretty good right now. I do need to fix that right corner. I'm not going to worry about it too much right now just because this is just for the video purposes. If I had this mounted or in a hush box, I would fix it, but it looks pretty good right now. So I'm just going to leave it as is right now. And then it's going to tell you that the AI Cinema will detect your environment and content and automatically optimize picture quality parameters. And then it's going to tell you that your calibration is complete. Okay, so I am connected to my KALEIDESCAPE. And now we're going to go to the projector menu. So right now I'm on AI Cinema. So you have AI Cinema for picture mode, you have bright, and you can see that drastically changes the color. So it just made everything look like a bluish green. You have filmmaker mode, which that looks like it's the most accurate. Cinema and user. So we're going to go over to the filmmaker mode. If we go over to our right, we have sound mode, we have cinema, music, game, and sports. If we go over to light source, we have high dynamic, low dynamic, eco, normal. So we're going to leave this on high dynamic. And then you've got keystone if you need to make keystone correction. You've got screen fit, so you can do auto or manual. So you can see that my top right is a little bit off. So I am actually going to adjust that now. Don't recommend doing this if you don't have to, because you will be using the usable pixels. Then you have fast mode, off and on. You have HDR brightness, and right now we don't have any HDR, so that's probably why it's grayed out. You have information, so it will tell you their information on screen, picture mode, light source, high dynamic, 3D format, firmware version, color system. And then edit. You can edit the different modes, so we're not going to do that right now. And if we go into the advanced menu, you'll get a bigger menu, which looks more like standard menus that you usually typically see. So then you can go in here and you can change the filmmaker mode, you can change the fast mode, the brightness, contrast, color, tint, sharpness, advanced color settings. So you would be able to adjust this on every picture mode. For audio, you can change the audio output from 3.5mm audio return or SPDIF. Audio format, you can change it to auto, LCM, LPCM, RAW, or RAW Plus. So let's leave this on RAW Plus. And then you have left or right switch. For display, you can change the aspect ratio to 4:3, 16:9, or auto. Auto source search, you can change that to on or off. You can rename the source. You can adjust 3D if you're watching 3D content. HDMI settings, you can change the HDMI format from auto, full, limited. HDMI equalizer, you can change the equalizers on each HDMI input. HDMI EDID, you have enhanced plus, so you can change those there. And then you have HDMI device control, projector power on by device, and device power off by projector. You can turn on 24p True Cinema. For installation, you can select the projector position, smart auto settings, high altitude mode, 12-volt trigger or baud rate. For system, you have your language, you have background settings, menu settings. So it looks like you can do ISF certification. You know how to do that. Menu position, you can change that to center, top left, top right, bottom left, or center. Menu display time always You can change the increments on that. You have light source information where it will tell you the amount of usage time for each mode, how many hours. Operation settings. You've got LED indicator light on, power on and off settings. You can do a firmware upgrade, set to factory default, and then you've got your information. For reference, I'm using the BenQ on my 110-inch acoustically transparent CMOS screen at about 9 feet away, and it fills the screen perfectly. Let's take a look at the movie Alpha on KALEIDESCAPE, which is a very difficult movie for displays, and especially projectors to reproduce in HDR without some type of external tone mapping device. When watching HDR content on the KALEIDESCAPE, it looks like you have 3 picture profiles to choose from: Filmmaker mode, HDR10 mode, and AI HDR mode. The Filmmaker mode looks the most accurate and natural, while the AI mode actually does a decent job, but adds a bit too much processing for my liking, with what looks like some smoothing on skin, and the colors are a tad bit oversaturated compared to the Filmmaker mode. And the HDR10 picture profile looks much more muted in comparison, and also looks a little processed, but I'm sure you can go into the settings and make picture profile adjustments and turn off some of that processing. If we hop over to the Spears and MUNSIL 4K Ultra HD disc and look at some HDR10 Plus 10,000 nit material, you only get 1 picture profile to choose from, but it actually does a pretty good job of tone mapping. I was expecting for this clip to be absolutely blown out without an external tone mapping device like my MadVR NV Core, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that the BenQ does a really good job with detail. I can actually see the trees and hills in the background, and in the foreground pretty much all of the grass is visible. Again, this is very surprising because even my higher end Epson QB1000 struggles with this scene at 10,000 nits, but the BenQ is holding its own with that HDR10 Plus tone mapping. And for you 3D fans, this projector does support 3D, and it does a very good job with 3D content. And it's been a few years since I've owned a projector with 3D, so I forgot how much I enjoyed watching 3D content. I never saw any type of artifacts or banding when watching 3D content, and it's worth noting that I wasn't even sitting dead center. I was sitting off to the side, which can sometimes distort the 3D image if you're sitting at a weird angle, but this wasn't the case with the BenQ. Okay, so there are a couple of things that I don't really care for. One, I mentioned this in the beginning, the manual lens shift and the manual zoom. I'm just not a fan of that. Call me spoiled. I've had, digital zoom and digital lens shift on 3 separate Epson projectors, and it's a great feature to have. I'm just not a big fan of having to manually, you have to be physically at the projector to do this. You can't do it from the remote. You have to do it. And again, if you're somebody that has this, that's going to be putting this in a hush box, that's going to be very, very difficult. And then again, that manual lens cover, not a fan of that either, but I think that's probably nitpicking. That's not going to be a big issue. If I had to deal with that, and if I had to put the, take the lens cover on and off, if that's the least of my worries, then hey, so be it. Again, I don't think this is touted as like the high-end projector, probably like mid-level budget. So, you're not going to get some of the premium features that you will, like I said, with Sony, JVC, and Epson. But as far as the picture, I was very, very impressed with this picture. Again, this is my first time having a BenQ projector in for review. I've kind of stayed away from them because me personally, I always felt like they, I guess, weren't up to par with the competition. But after seeing this in person, hey man, BenQ's got some good stuff. The black levels could be better. The black levels, you're not going to get JVC, Sony, and even my Epson. I mean, the black levels, are much, much better, and that's to be expected. But I was very surprised with the picture quality. Native 4K projector, and the 3D was awesome. Like I said, I forgot how fun it is to watch 3D movies when I was watching Gravity. I kind of just sat there and just watched it for, I want to say 20 or 30 minutes. And then I'm like, oh, hey, I'm just doing this for a review, so I need to, get on the script and do everything. But yeah, guys, this is a pretty good projector. I'm really happy with it. I'll leave some links in the description if you want to pick up this projector. And let me know down in the comments if you guys have any experience with BenQ, what your thoughts on, if you plan on picking up this projector. Now, as far as the Ruipro HDMI cable, it worked flawlessly. What I did was I plugged in the HDMI, I plugged in the USB into the HDMI, and then the other USB I plugged directly into one of the USB ports on the projector that says media reader. I just plugged it in for power. I didn't have to use, it comes with 2 USB, but I only had to use one. I don't know if that's the correct way, but I plugged in one, got signal. I actually had forgotten to do this, to plug in the USB to the HDMI. When I first plugged it up, I wasn't getting any video, no audio, and I was like, what's the deal? And I was like, oh, let me plug this in. So as soon as I plugged it into the projector, I didn't even plug in the other end. I don't know if the other end even has one. Yeah, it does. So both HDMI tips have the USB connector. I only had to plug in one and it worked. So I don't know if that's going to work for everybody, but yeah, I'm very impressed with the Ruipro, and these are going to be very convenient because they're so thin. I'm assuming that you can run these through walls. So if you've got like a super long run, again, I have, this one's a 10-footer, and then I have the 50-footer that I use connected from the projector to directly to the KALEIDESCAPE. I had 0 issues, but eventually I'm probably going to run that up into the attic and back out to my rack. That way I can do some testing if I have, multiple projectors up there. I am going to be working on something to try to get a bigger hush box so I can have room for another projector where I can, test. But I'm going to need another HDMI cable, so I'll just put this in the ceiling, run it back out, and I should have no issues. As this is my first experience with the BenQ projector, I gotta say, the W2720i provided a pretty good HDR performance, especially considering its price point. While Filmmaker mode offers the most accurate and natural presentation for HDR content, the AI HDR mode is a decent option, though it does introduce a bit too much processing for my taste, with some skin smoothing and slightly oversaturated colors. The HDR10 mode appears more muted, but again, I'm confident that with some manual calibration, it can be fine-tuned to your liking. And I have to hand it to BenQ. The W2720i surprised me with its tone mapping, particularly when faced with challenging HDR10 plus 10,000 nit material from the Spears and MUNSIL disc. I was genuinely surprised by its ability to retain detail in such bright scenes, clearly rendering trees, hills, and even individual blades of grass. This is a significant feat, as even higher-end projectors like my Epson QB1000 struggles with this particular clip. The BenQ W2720i demonstrates a remarkable capability to handle demanding HDR content without the need for external tone mapping devices, making it a very compelling option for home theater enthusiasts who are on a budget. And I can't forget about how good the 3D is on this projector. Watching Gravity on 3D made me remember how enjoyable 3D content can be, and makes me wish Epson hadn't gotten rid of their 3D technology in their lineup. So that's my review of the W2720i projector from BenQ. Have you experienced this projector firsthand? Do you plan on picking this up to use in your home theater? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.